Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Audit and Finance Standing Committee meeting for September 21st, 2022. My name is Paul Russell. I represent Lower Sackville, and it's 5 after 10 in the morning. I apologize for the, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. I apologize for the slight delay. My computer decided to reboot just as soon as I got here. I'd also like to acknowledge that the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of June 22nd and June 27th, 2022. Thank you, Councillor Hensby. Seconder is Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Are there any errors or omissions? Not seeing any. All in favor of the minutes of June 22nd and June 27th, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Great, thank you. The next item is the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Over to Annie.
Thank you, Chair. The Clerk's office did not receive any requests for additions or deletions today.
Okay, thank you, Annie. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to bring forward for the next meeting the information item on the provincial financial indicators and ask maybe Jerry if we could have a presentation on that at the next meeting, if that's possible.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We can certainly do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anything else on the order of business? I don't see anybody with their name forward, so can I have a motion to approve that, please? Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon, seconded by Councillor Morse. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. Business arising out of the minutes. Not seeing anybody. Call for declaration of conflicts of interest. Not seeing anybody. Jump ahead. Motions of reconsideration, motions of rescission, consideration of deferred business, and notice of tabled matters are all none. Correspondence.
Thank you, Chair. The Clerk's office did not receive any correspondence for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. And do we have any petitions?
The Clerk's office did not receive any notification of any petitions.
Okay, thank you. And we don't have any presentations. We don't have any information items brought forward. So the next, and we don't have any items from the Auditor General. So the next item on the agenda is the first quarter of 2022 and 23 financial report. Over to you, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jerry Blackwood, Chief Financial Officer. So today we have Dave Harley, Director of Financial Reporting and Accounting, and Tyler Higgins, who is Manager of Budget and Reserves, here to present. This report, in terms of first quarter, a little bit different than what you're used to seeing in terms of first quarter. Typically, we come in, at this time, we have, over the last 5 years or so, somewhere around a, $10 to $15 million surplus. This year, as you can see, we're projecting a surplus of about a little under $3 million. So, we've also added a couple slides in there. We want to start certainly taking a view of reserves in terms of not total balance, but basically what's sort of uncommitted in reserves, what is in terms of capacity. And, we want to certainly socialize the financial pressures that we are dealing with coming up for this budget year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. Dave Harley, Director of Accounting and Financial Reporting. So I'm here this morning to take you through the first quarter financial report. To start with, We are currently projecting a deficit of $2.8 million, primarily due to increase in fuel costs, which are about $11 million greater than what we'd budgeted. We've also had a decrease in the number of building permits compared to our budget of about $4.8 million, largely due to lower than planned volume of permits being issued and fewer large scale permits. We've seen some increases in contracts specific to winter maintenance and collections of about $1.4 million and an increase in our RCMP contract of about $640,000. As you remember, at year end, we took some steps to offset this by transferring about $11.8 million of our 21-22 surplus to offset operational costs this year. We've also seen an increase in our investment income due to the increase in interest rates of about $2.6 million, and we are currently seeing a decrease in our compensation benefits, largely due to vacancies, and that's around $920,000 so far this year. So all those brought together, as I said, we are currently projecting as of the end of June a $2.8 million deficit for the year. We have risks and opportunities that we monitor throughout the year that are going to have some impacts. Big impact this year has been the inflationary increases and stock shortages, so it's got an impact on our operation, on our capital budget, and the ability to progress much of our capital work. We have commodity costs. As I said, significant increases in fuel and diesel costs this year have caused us, are the big drivers of our deficit that we're currently looking at. We know there's impacts around staffing levels and the ability to hire, and we also know that there's the potential for further impacts of winter-related weather this year and other storms, as well as continued pressure in housing this year. Moving on to our councillors' funds, we have the two funds, the district capital funds. Of the $3.1 million budget for the year, we've already spent or committed $1.3 million, leaving $1.7 million available for spend throughout the rest of the year. And for district activity funds, there's a $72,000 budget. $18,800 has been spent or committed as of the end of June, leaving $53,200 available for the rest of the year. Recreational area rates. We have 21 of these area rate accounts. The surplus in these accounts as of April 1st was $1.2 million. We've seen expenditures so far this year of about $290,000, bringing that surplus down to $877,000. Next, we're going to move on to our reserves. So as Jerry said, we've kind of changed up the presentation of this a little bit. We're starting with our opening balance of $473 million currently in our reserves. We have commitments against these balances of $263 million and a pending contribution of $71 million, so we're projecting a closing balance this year of $281 million. If you can see, looking out, we have the next 3 years anticipated closing balances, and then we've also provided our projected uncommitted balance and our projected commitments in the future. The majority of these commitments are related to the strategic capital reserve and the strategic initiatives the council has made plans to fund. So these include things like Halifax, the integrated mobility plan, and other strategic initiatives that council has. So the funds are still within the reserves for future use. We've just shown them as being committed towards those projects. Moving on to accounts receivable. Our aged accounts receivable, we have outstanding property taxes of $28.9 million, local improvement charges of $11.6 million. Payments in lieu of taxes are virtually nil, and general revenue is $8.7 million still outstanding, so we have a total gross accounts receivable of $49.2 million as of June 30th. In terms of our capital projections, we had a net budget available before any expenditures of $513.9 million at June 30th. We had spent $23.9 million this fiscal year. We're projecting a further $188 million in expenditures, so we're projecting to carry forward $324.8 million to work into 23-24 fiscal year. In terms of hospitality expenses, we've only had a very small amount, $39 in hospitality expenditures, and you can see the details of that on attachment 9 of the report. And in terms of expenses for reportable individuals, we've had expenditures this year of $29.7 thousand. The majority of this was related to training and development, and out-of-town travel for the FCM conference and a few other conferences that were attended by councillors. So now we just wanted to lead into a few of the pressures we're seeing heading into our 23-24 budget season. So we've already spoken about inflation and significant increase in costs, especially in fuel. We're seeing increases in utilities costs as well, and significant increases in several of our service contracts. Staffing issues continue to exist, so we're finding it difficult to fill many internal positions quickly and efficiently. And we have multiple collective agreements that are currently under negotiation. We also are seeing for the first time a lack of growth in our D-transfer tax revenues, and I'll get to that a little bit more in a second. We're seeing a significant cap from op required under the current plan for next year. And we also utilized one-time reserve funding to balance our 22-23 budget, and that's not going to be available in the upcoming years. We're not projecting a surplus at this time. So in terms of some of the budget pressures we've identified, and I think we showed this as well before at year end, or similar to this. So we've had one-time reserve funding of $7 million that we used to balance the budget. We have some salary adjustments of about $11.8 million, increased contract costs, the MFTP impact of $2.8 million. We're projecting a decrease in the revenues for P&D on the permit side of about $4 million. And our fuel costs, we're actually looking at about another $10 million over what we had budgeted this year for our fuel costs. Then we have an additional $15 million required from our cap from op, including some of the sidewalk work that was looked to be done, and very few offsets of these pressures. So we really just have investment income at this point, which right now, as I said, we're projecting about a $2.5 million increase in that. So overall, that leads to a net budget pressure of about $54 million that we've identified so far. And this is very early in the budget process, so we're still looking to work with the business units to identify further pressures that may exist as we get into working on our 23-24 operating budget. Now, I said I'd speak a little bit more about D-transfer tax. Just wanted to call to attention the impact of the surpluses we've seen of D-transfer taxes over the past several years. So what we've laid out here is our actual D-transfer taxes compared to our budget, and the surplus we've seen compared to our overall general rate surplus. And as you can see in virtually every year here, it's made up greater than 50% of our total surplus. And this year, for the first time, we're not projecting any surplus in D-transfer taxes. We're actually looking at that trend starting to reverse a little bit and potentially starting to come down as we go into the next year. And finally, just a few of the capital pressures, and many of these are similar to what we're seeing on the operating side as well. So we have inflation, and we're seeing a 50 to 100% increase over estimates, especially in a lot of our building projects right now. So those are having significant impact on our ability to fund projects going into the next year. We're also seeing projects being delayed for rescoping and retendering as a result of this. Again, we're having staffing shortages, so it's many internal positions we're having trouble filling. Contractors and consultants we're having shortages there as well. So it's affecting our ability to deliver these projects on time and on estimate. And finally, just in supply chain, we're still continuing to see delays that we've seen in the last year or so over our pre-pandemic delivery times. So those are also causing us issues in terms of the timing of many of our projects. And that's the end of the presentation, so happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for that, Dave. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, David, and Jerry and everybody. I want to talk a little bit about this net budget pressures of $54 million. What are we to take from that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor. So these pressures are pressures that we have over and above what we have built into our budget this current year. So we're going to have to fund an additional $54 million right now over what our budget is this year in terms of these operating pressures. And like I said, those numbers are preliminary at this point. We're expecting that may continue to grow as we do more work with the business units to identify, what some of their other pressures are.
Right, so you're telling us that at this point in time, we would be $54 million over our budget, a $54 million deficit?
This is for next year's budget. So
okay.
This is things we're going to have to look to fund in next year's budget,
okay.
Barring any other changes.
Right, and so what I would say to that is, we're not going to, in my view, increase the budget by $54 million. I'm not. We had a tax increase last year of 4.7%. We've built in 3% of that. That 3% for Halifax continues. So any increase in taxes we have is over and above the 3%, right? So I just want to say that as we look at the budget for next year, we're going to have to look at our spending, in my view, and not just at saying if we're over that we're going to automatically fund those out of some. Now, we have reserves, we have debt, I get all that sort of stuff, but I think we're going to have a look at what we're spending money on. Some of it's unavoidable. The fuel cost, is what we're all dealing with. But we're going to have to look at some of these things like cap from op expenses, P&D revenue shortfall. That I guess is understandable in the context. So this needs to be a warning to us as we start looking at the budget that we've always kept taxes pretty low in this municipality, lower than any other of the big cities in Canada, with the exception, I think, of Quebec City. Last year was a bit of an aberration, and I am very comfortable putting money into climate funding. I think our plan is good and it's necessary, but that's already baked into the budget. I'm not particularly interested in looking at 4.5%, 3.5% increases going forward. So this is a warning for us as councillors that we need to start looking and making sure that we just can't keep increasing taxes on people. It's a little bit of a burden right now. It's a big burden for people. So I appreciate that. This is a heads up as we start looking at the budget over the next, and I know you guys are deep into that. So, we're just going to have to tighten the belt at some point in time here. That's my view on this. But I appreciate that you're outlining where we are. And on the deed transfer tax, if we come in at $3 million, that's good. That's great. That means we did a good job of projections. For years, I've been saying we under-budgeted the deed transfer, and I agree with you that probably is going to turn a corner and start going down at some point in time. So, we have to be realistic about that. So, the challenges, and you're outlining them for us, and I appreciate that. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your comments. And you're right. It is early days. With respect to the pressures that we have identified here, most of those are contractual. With respect, there's some things around moving forward together, and as you mentioned, cap from operating. But most of these expenditures and pressures are contractual, or like fuel. We need fuel to be able to run buses, et cetera. So, and I just want to point out, this is an expense number. It doesn't include any revenue offsets that we would get from the assessment roll. And again, it's early days, to predict there, but we definitely don't have a $54 million revenue offset coming in on that. So we're tracking that, and as you know, we get our assessment roll just before Christmas. But again, this is for awareness, and to your point, to be prepared for those budget discussions that'll be coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Go ahead, Councillor Morse.
Chair, I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about the deed transfer tax change and why we're seeing a lack of growth, what the causes might be, please.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a bit of a slowing in the housing market. As that housing market slows, we're seeing a decrease in the amount of deed transfer tax that we're bringing in. As the interest rates increase, I expect we're going to continue to see that slowdown in the housing market as the affordability becomes a bigger issue for people as they look to buy houses. So, the lower value that you're buying, the lower deed transfer tax is going to be as well. We are seeing a bit of a decrease in some of the larger scale ones as well, because many of the developers aren't doing as much work as they had been prior to. So that is an additional drag on that detransfer tax. So it's been a number that's been steadily increasing over the years. We have always expected that eventually it is going to peak and start coming back down. Looks like we are reaching that point now.
Okay, so it is significant in terms of the projects that are being deferred?
It can be significant. It's always hard to say because we don't have line of sight as to what people are buying or planning to buy necessarily. So those can always come in and increase that detransfer tax that we're seeing. But we are noticing a slowdown within that entire market. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, what we're seeing in the housing market is typically, a result of some of the fiscal policy, monetary policy around rate increases, which are meant to cool off inflation and the housing market. So, we typically in Halifax outperform the national averages, but we just want to caution on that. That said, on the commercial side of things, we have seen some big sales over the summer. Commercially, 1801 Hollis sold, Metropolitan Place in Dartmouth, the big apartment complex by the bridge sold, and we had a big apartment portfolio change hands, about $85 million. So there's some of those transactions happening, but we just want to caution on the residential. The other piece on that is, although we budgeted $83 million in total revenue for detransfer tax this year, we did hedge off some of that risk by basically saying anything over, I think it's $72 million or $73 million, will go to the capital reserve. So the number that we have to make is like $73 million this year without putting us in a deficit position on detransfer tax. We're hoping, and when we budgeted that number last year, that things were still moving, growth in the market, and that we could put some more money into reserves with surplus dollars. Just one other thing about detransfer tax and the budget that I'd like to mention. So when you look at 2021, we had a $33 million surplus. We put that entire surplus into our reserves. For 21-22, we had $30 million. So we only put $2.8 million into reserves. So we used a lot of that surplus last year to cover off a lot of one-time things in the budget to manage that rate and keep it at 4.6%. So that capacity will not be there this year around detransfer tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Audit.
With me going now instead of the committee, or?
I'm okay with you
Okay,
going again.
all right,
Yes.
I didn't know if you
Thank
wanted to wait for the committee members, so thank you, Mr. Chair, I appreciate it. I want to start by saying that I support the mayor's comments and concerns that he made a few moments ago as well. So just some questions, and probably not really to our presenters, but I guess, Jerry, maybe to you. I mean, the staffing issue, of course, is a big concern. It saved us $1 million, but we have a lot of vacancies, and that is hurting us in transit and in, I would say, probably planning and development, perhaps police and fire. So are we looking at increasing wages? Are we looking at doing more with less? Are we looking at just simply doing less because we don't have more? Sort of, I hope behind the scenes that you and Jacques and others are working on a plan that the staffing issue just may not be a little blip. We do have demographic challenges, we do have economic challenges, as well as the inflationary challenges that we met. So I'd be interested to know what's going on behind the scenes. And to touch on what the mayor said, the other day I chaired the meeting, the regional council meeting, and I didn't say anything because I was in the chair, but we brought forward this wonderful idea about naturalizing. So we're going to go out to the public and tell them we're going to naturalize. We're not going to mow as much, we're not going to trim as much, but we need to hire 3 people in order to do that. So you can imagine the little bit of a disconnect there when Joe Public looks at that. And we are going to have to start thinking about those kinds of things. We have an idea, let's go hire 3 people. We have an idea, let's go hire 2 people. You know, A, we may not be able to find them, B, we may not be able to afford them. So we're going to have to start looking at some of those ideas. I will ask these gentlemen, and thank you for the presentation. On slide 7, you were talking about projects, and there's 324 million going forward. Is that normal? Is that highly abnormal? It sounds like, you know, here we are trying to raise money to do projects. We all have things we want done in our districts, big and small. But in my view, this is looking like we're having trouble getting them out the door. And is that just because it's still early in the year, or is it the reality of that we can't find the contractors, we can't afford what they're coming back with? Can maybe just help me understand that a little?
Crystal Nellen, Director of Asset Management, through the chair to you, Councillor. At this point, it's early in the season.
Okay.
Typically, we see the majority of our capital spend in Q2 and Q3.
Okay.
So we will have better line of sight on how we're able to progress. The big impact on this year is that in the budget for this year doubled. In the past, we've been running about 150 more or less million, and this year we increased it to 320 million overall. So there is naturally a bit of a ramping up and time delay. What should give the committee some comfort is that, if you'll notice in the detail of the report, the current procured commitments that are in motion right now for work that has been tendered and such is about 300, a little over 300 million itself. So depending on, say, supply chain or issues around that, it will depend how quickly that progresses. And like I said, we'll see that develop more as we go.
And again, not a criticism, but a concern that A, are we going to get this work done? B, does council and staff learn from this next year to say that there's only so much capacity out there to get work done? So it's just something to learn from. But cautious optimism, but also maybe a little learning for us then, is what you're saying. Very good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to my staffing concerns or not, but thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Crystal. Yeah, just with respect to capital, I mean, you know, staffing challenges certainly all around, and Caroline can speak to that. I think, you know, with the pressure that we've put in there, that's projected just based on our staff complement now and, you know, collective agreement renewals, et cetera, contract bargaining that we have coming up. But yeah, the staffing is definitely significant in terms of, because we've ramped up to try to be able to deliver, and, you know, we're competing with the market out there, with developers, and other big projects. So I'll let Caroline speak to staffing.
Actually, Jacques, you've got your mic on. Would you? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Caroline.
Caroline Blair-Smith, Deputy CAO, Corporate Services. The staffing situation that we're in is certainly complex at the moment. You know, recently we were in a conversation with the Big Eight, and many of whom are doing a compensation review, as we are as well, to see where we are with the market. The vacancy rate is going up and down weekly as we work through this. So there are some positive pockets and some not so positive pockets. So, you know, I would say certainly there is a challenge there, and that may cause us to have to adjust compensation. Certainly the unionized compensation pieces will be looked at the table, so we'll leave those alone. But we do have a new recruitment action plan that we have just finished. And that has a lot of new and innovative actions in it that should help us. You'll start to see some things like a PSA came out about a week and a half ago, and you'll start to see many activities that recruitment team is now ramping up. So a much greater emphasis internally on that active recruiting.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Thank you much, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on Councillor Audit's comments about construction we carry forward and stuff, Just kind of wondering, as the mayor said, do we have to look more realistically at our upcoming capital budgets to try and figure out what's going to be timely enough, or how many projects can we expect to be done? Here we are now finishing our second quarter. We've been monitoring the amount of capital projects that have not been tendered yet or becoming overpriced and coming back to the drawing board for reevaluation. So I'll be curious to see those in the second quarter. And in regards to how much budget do you anticipate that's going to be pushed forward to the next construction season anyway, because some projects are coming in over budget or under capacity, the construction industry. So I'm just kind of curious of where we stand on that. And I'd like to know when your calculations of these reports are done, because on your out-of-town travel for me, $746 for the first quarter. My actual expenditures are $2,948. So I'd like to know where that number's coming from. You're missing $2,200.
Go ahead, Jacques.
No, you go ahead. I'll speak after.
Okay. All right, through your chair to the counselor. I would leave the specific answers on what the project managers are experiencing with the industry to them themselves. I can tell you that, we are in, like you said, coming to the end of quarter two, and September is when we first really dig into our deeper analysis to start preparing next year's budget. So typically within September, October, we get into a lot of detail on each project, where we at, what are the mitigating actions that we need to take. I can tell you that the projects that are in progress this year for the double budget, over $300 million, 60% of those are the ongoing program projects. So those are typically seasonal in nature and cyclical from that perspective. So as I mentioned, depending on what the weather is later in the fall, can have a big determination on how much we are able to experience and progress throughout this construction season. There's certainly challenges going right now.
Go ahead, Jacques.
Yeah, thank you. So getting the work out is a challenge, there's no doubt about it, especially in the pandemic and supply chain issues, labor issues in the private sector, delivery and all that. So you can expect when we come back to the capital budget, it will be restated. There's no question that we cannot deliver the 23-24 capital budget in the manner that was put on paper and adopted by council last year, right? That has to be restated. A lot of these projects are going to have to get pushed out, so be ready for that, because our capacity to deliver on those, both in terms of human resources and monetarily, in terms of managing the budget going forward, is going to be critical. So we're going to have to restate the capital budget, pushing out a number of projects, and I can't tell you which ones those are. As Driscoll says, we're sort of getting into the weeds now in terms of what can be delivered this year, what's in flight, what'll be tendered. Recognizing also we tender throughout the year. It's not as if we tender, all in May, June, July, or March, April, May. It's something that it's a rotation of projects going through, depending on where the project managers are, where the planning design is, and all that. The next budget will be challenging, there's no doubt about that. I mean, the numbers that you see today are preliminary numbers, but they're real numbers, they're contractual, mostly contractual. The inflation is still running in the 7 to 8% range. You can't operate a business, with coming in with a budget that's under inflation year after year after year. It's going to catch up to you at some point, and next year is when it's going to catch up to you, right? 23, 24 will be a tough budget. As Jerry points out, the revenue side has not been examined yet in detail. We don't have the details from PVSC. But, when you think about the lift in the commercial tax base in 23, 24, we predicted the last two to 3 years in a row that commercial tax base will be the hardest hit in 23, 24. That's probably going to come true. We don't know yet for sure, but given the fact that we have Lots of assessments that have been appealed. Commercial values, especially office market, has been hit in terms of value. So, you can't expect, you'll expect to see a flat commercial tax base again this year, right? So we'll be relying on the residential tax base to give us a lift. That lift would likely be in the range somewhere between $15 and $20 million. And you compare that to the 50, say to round it up, $60 million challenge we have. That's, possibly, might be a quarter to a third of fixing the problem. We're also expecting to get some relief from other levels of government in terms of other areas. I don't expect much more than, $9 to $10 million in that area. I can't speak publicly about what that might be, but, then ultimately there's another possible relief. But when you look at gas prices, and this year we hedged ourselves, we put monies aside, contingency to cover the increase in price of gas. So whatever we get on the operating side from other levels of government potentially will simply pay for the increase in gas prices for Halifax Transit. So you can't count that at all. It's a wash. So you still have a challenge there going forward. So on the staffing side, we have been ramping up. We're, as Caroline points out, there are lots of challenges around staffing, but we can't grow at 10,000 people a year and expect to do the same things with the same amount of people, right? And then plus adding more pressure and more services. So your options are fairly limited. We're the dining out on transfer tax is over now. We're not going to be able to rely on that because it won't create the surplus that we used to have before. We also, I'll remind everyone here that we also had some generous monies that came in from the federal government over the last few years that we used to offset the pressures, and those are one-time money that has to be now found somewhere else, right? So you're probably left with some hard decisions, particularly around service levels. So you might want to get ready to have a conversation about what things you might want to cut, right? The challenge with cutting services is that most of our services are delivered by staff. And when you start to decide to reduce service levels, the impact is not immediate. It's not in 1 year. It's actually the second year out. So, the solutions are not easy. But as the Mayor said and Jerry has said, it's still early in the game. We need to look at all aspects of the budget. I would also point out that capital from operating is an issue. But you can't always. If you look at our capital from operating now, it's all put against non-bondable items, pretty much, right? So you look at capital from operating as is currently applied. That's not bondable anyway. They're all short-term money. It's all stuff that's assets that are 5 years or less, right? So it's not as if you can borrow the money instead of sending the capital from operating. And you look at, and there's some talk now federally and provincially, federally particularly, around permanent gas tax funding, other infrastructure monies that might come down. Permanent gas tax funding will only hit the books in 26, 27, potentially. That's the earliest that will hit. There might be some monies coming through on the Housing Accelerator program was announced in the budget in broad strokes. The details of that we don't know yet. That may or may not be able to impact our budget on the operating side, depending on the nature of the monies that would come from the feds, right? So there's a lot of balls in the air right now, right? It's kind of early to say where this will all land, but I will say to you that this will be it'll be the toughest budget you will have seen in many years, simply because of the environment that we're in, given the pandemic, supply chain issues, inflation that's going through the roof, gas prices, different lot by gas prices in our case. So this will be challenging, right? Anyway, on the staffing side, it's very difficult to slow down the staffing in terms of the positions that have been adopted by council. And most of the existing positions that have been added are in planning and development, and we all know where we are in planning and development. We need more, not less. We need more approvals, not less approvals. I can tell you that we're probably tracking this year. Right now, we're tracking about 7,000. There's about 7,000 building permits that have been issued in this year, which is fantastic. About 4,000 are under construction now. So what we're doing, what council has approved in the past, is actually working. We're actually seeing more construction, more permits out the door. which is a good sign, right? Which means that there'll be a lot more assessment on the residential side or whatever those permits are for. So there's some good signals coming through the development world right now. But the challenge will be revenue, right? And how do we offset the loss of the big surplus we've been generating in the last few years, which will not be there? And how do we offset the loss of some of the one-time money that came in from other levels of government? So sorry to be the bearer of reality, but that's the reality we're facing right now, and I wish you luck with the budget.
Oh, yeah, you're going to miss it, aren't you?
Thank you, Jacques. Go ahead, Jerry, and then Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Jacques. And just, one thing with regards to, our overall position, we got to think about reserves too, right? So, we were very healthy on the reserve side of things, but we want to make it clear we're committed. So, pretty much all of our reserves are committed to capital projects. So, we got a couple of reports that are coming here this morning that are budget overages that you'll get into in a little bit. But, there was, no capacity. The capital reserve is trending to a deficit position. I think, next year there's some big capital commitments against reserves, right? So, overall, we're looking at, in terms of what we got on committed in terms of dollars, like we're looking at about $12 million, right? Which, they're for sort of one-time things. So there's not a lot of capacity in terms of uncommitted that can cover off some of the inflationary pressures that we have been experiencing on our capital projects, where we got to look at reprioritization and reallocation of funding within the current capital plan. So that's a challenge as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dave.
Just in response to your last question there about the expenses. So we do the timing of that is based on June 30th. So if there's been any delay in that getting entered in the system, it may actually not show up until the following quarter. But I will follow up and get back to you with the details of whether or not that is the case or not.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a clarification. In the report, it said that our permits are actually, there's a projected deficit of volumes and high-value permits being lower than budgeted. So I was wondering, what's that attributed to? If I missed that, I apologize. And I was also wondering if you could explain to me the difference. So the general rate says that there's a deficit of 2.8 million at this point, and then how does that compare to the 54 million net budget pressure? And is that 2.8 million expected to grow by the time we get to the budget deliberations for next year? And also, just going into this budget season, yay, favorite time of year, but we can't cut services. If anything is going to be cut or deferred, it has to be capital projects. Like we can't cut services to our residents while we're expecting them to pay through, higher taxes. And please, just an appeal to staff and everyone as you're going through this, just keep in mind our fixed income seniors, our low income homeowners, and our single parent families who are just struggling. And anyway, thanks. Those are my two questions.
So the $4 million deficit in the in the permits revenue is due to a slowdown in the number of permits that we're seeing. So people are coming in buying less permits. Partially, I think it's because of there's less work being done. I think we also potentially had an aggressive budget for that this year. So we've seen significant growth in that over the past couple of years. So there was significant growth built into their budget, but that seems like that may have been too aggressive. While at the same time, like I said, it's the same issues that we're seeing across with the impact on the transfer tax, and it's market issues that are causing there's less work being done because it costs more to do that work. So that's all having a negative impact on that permit revenue. Now, that $2.8 million, that deficit, that's currently our best estimate of where we're going to finish the year. So there will be, between now and the end of the year, there are going to be other things that come in and affect that, but we don't have line of sight into what those might be at this point in time. So this is our best estimate at this point of time of where we're going to be come March 31st.
So what does that mean then? If we're in a deficit position going into the next budget?
If we end this year in a deficit position, the first thing we have to do in our next fiscal year is fund our deficit. So instead of having money, to carry forward like we did last year, we'll actually have to start ourselves almost in a $2.8 million hole next year in terms of our funding. So we'll have to use that money, that first $2.8 million, to fund our deficit.
Okay. All right.
And I think your last question was around the $54 million.
Right.
Those are pressures on next year's budget, so they're not really tied into like the fuel increase that's in there. We've already accounted for that in our $2.8 million deficit this year. Okay. This is what, as we go to build next year's budget, those are pressures that we've identified on the expense side of things that we'll potentially need to fund.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation and the very lengthy reports. I didn't get through every single project on those lists, but I did get to a lot of them. And David, thank you for mentioning that you actually have a higher travel than I do. We both have a big district, and if the district boundary review happens, it could be terrible for a new District 1, I think.
Get a helicopter.
A lot of my questions have been asked by colleagues or answered by Jacques. One of the things was really about restating the capital budget and when we might anticipate seeing that restated budget, if it may be in the second quarter after we see, where we are. And if the capital budget is restated, does it then give a schedule? And I can't remember on what page it was, but there was a beautiful schedule about the capital projects and where they might be moved into in which fiscal year. So that was one question. A very small point, just around the word surplus. When we're talking about area rates and stuff, it's more about what is remaining for the year, as opposed to if community groups are looking at that saying, oh, do we have a surplus? But it's really, it looks like it's just what's remaining for the year for them. Thank you, Councillor Purdy, because I was actually going to ask about the permits and whether or not the reduction was a result of a lack of applications being in, or was it a staffing concern about how we process them? There's been a lot of questions I've received about the timing of permits, and it takes so long and all of that kind of stuff. So I just wasn't sure. So the clarity on that's appreciated. Thank you. And when it comes to, I know we haven't looked at the revenue, but connecting the revenue to where the vacancies are in HR and then prioritizing what positions, is that something that the HR plan is going to look at so that we get sort of those staffing positions filled that directly attribute to us having revenue? Thanks.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, so I'll try the first question, capital budget. So you will see the capital budget in December. So we're now in the throes of, the working committee and capital steering committee. Working committee is meeting, and the capital steering committee has met and is meeting more over the next couple of months to finalize the recommendation to council. So sometime in early December, you will see there'll be a meeting with council to look at the capital budget and to get approval for the advanced tenders like we normally do. And that happens before Christmas, and of course the operating budget is after Christmas. We'll also, before the end of the year, I'll be appearing before you probably towards the end of November with the fiscal framework conversation about setting the targets and what the reality is in terms of our tax rate and all that. And yes, on staffing, we look at, certainly a priority is planning and development in terms of trying to generate revenue, also parking services and those kinds of things, compliance. So we're looking at, putting priority on positions that do generate income. Planning and development have typically a vacancy anyway, simply because the way it's structured there. You enter the system, you get promoted, and we bring in others to backfill, and there's a normal natural churn there, but there's been increasing numbers in planning and development clearly over the last several years, and this year is no exception. We've added probably in the vicinity of 70 to 80 positions in planning and development over the last few years, most of which have been filled. But again, there's a backfilling that has to happen in order to fill that. So there's always a vacancy rate in that business unit by natural pressure.
Mr. Chair, one more question that I forgot to ask. Thank you. I do recall a conversation about would there be any relief for the retro for the RCMP contract? Is there any other government funding that we may be able to access for that?
At this time, there's no indication whether that will happen or not. We do know that the federal government has postponed issuing the bills for that. They deferred that, I think, earlier this year, probably somewhere around April or May. They made the decision to defer the sending of the bills to have further conversations with provinces. I understand those kinds of conversations are ongoing. We have not heard, I don't know if Jerry has heard anything from his sources, but I have not heard any decisions yet. We have provided for the increase on the balance sheet, so the money is there to pay for the back time. Should the federal and provincial governments not come through with any relief. But we have planned for that, and in the pressures that you've seen today from Jerry, that we're forecasting an increase to the cost of the RCMP. I would also point out that the estimate we put in for the RCMP in the budget this past year was understated by about $1 million, Jerry, or something like that. Yeah, so that's a bit of a pressure currently, but we've got monies in fiscal to cover that off.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dave.
Just in response to your question about the area rates, so that surplus that we speak of there, that's actually their accumulated surplus. So what happens is those funds are, their surplus accumulates year over year. We don't have access to those funds. They're used solely for the use of that area rate group. So we carry that accumulated surplus forward year over year. So they can add to it if they have an additional surplus in the year, or if they overspend their revenues for the current year, they can draw down on that accumulated surplus.
Thank you. I misread that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I want to say something I've been saying for years at this committee and at council, which is that the deed transfer tax is the dividend of growth in this city. If you went back 10 years ago and projected the kind of growth that we've had, you'd say, well, the commercial taxes must be going through the roof. Well, they haven't. Offices are smaller, companies are pirating each other's business. People are moving from one place to a new place. It's not necessarily a net growth. But the deed transfer, when you look on page 12, 6 years ago, the deed transfer budget was $33 million. The year before that, it was 32 in the 2016-17 budget book. 32 million in 5 years to 83 million. This has been enormous growth. We have had $80 million more in deed transfer revenue than we budgeted and I've been pushing for years to say, get that deed transfer number up there. It's going to change. It doesn't last forever. And by the way, you know what? Who knows? There are some significant projects that are looking to come to Halifax, and that will produce some more deed transfer tax. So that's a positive thing in my view. On the RCMP, Councillor Eagle, yeah, FCM is all over that with the federal government. We're given indication there will be some relief provided by the federal government on that, and that's why they're holding the bills, but not guaranteed. Jacques also mentioned money from the federal government on operating transit for revenue. Some of that I can't talk about. What I can say is that the federal government identified $750 million. Nova Scotia's share of that would be $11 million. It's supposedly to be matched by the provincial government and then accorded by ridership. We'll see what happens there, but certainly some of that money will come in, and I assume that money, if it comes in, Jerry, would either go to offset overruns this year or would go into a reserve for into a reserve. What would happen to that money when it comes in, assuming it comes in, whether it's $8, $9, $10 million?
Yeah, thank you. Unless Dave tells me otherwise, I'll trust it. He's the technical accountant of us, but we would book that money against this year. Yep.
So that would, yeah, and so that would then put us into a surplus position for this year, and that could be used for purposes next year. So I think we're going to have a conversation. Budgets are like playoff games. the next one is always the toughest one. Always is. That's just the way it is. I've heard every year we're going to have a tough budget. This year we will, because we're not going to have the cushion of deed transfer revenue in all likelihood. In fact, the deed transfer budget number will likely go down a little bit. So council will be faced with a decision. Staff will have to do their work. We'll have to do our work, and we'll have to say, what are the things that we are not going to spend money on? And that may be the case. We may have to do that this year, unless we want to go back and increase taxes. Last year, we increased them by 4.7%, 3% for Halifax, which is now baked into the budget. So that's got to be something in our mind as we go forward. We can't increase taxes by 4% every year. People don't, when you say, well, you can't grow by 10,000 people a year and still expect that, that you have the same level of service. Well, when you grow by 10,000 people a year, eventually they're going to pay the tax and increase your budget, and that's the way it goes. So we don't know where we're going to go on all these. We don't know what we're going to have from the provincial or federal governments in terms of potential sources of funding. Certainly, the biggest thing that we have with the federal government, in my view, is the what used to be called the gas tax, now called the Canada Community Building Fund or something like that. And we're pushing hard to see if we can get something on that from the federal government. But we don't know. So we just need to go into the budget this year recognizing that it will be challenging and that we're going to have to make some decisions, work together with our staff as we always do, and make good decisions on behalf of the citizens. And but it's not just staff that's going to have to do that. It's this table that's going to have to make those decisions as well. Anyway, it's always something to look forward to. Christmas and budget, best time of year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I've actually always enjoyed graduation day. That is my favorite day of the year. I had a look at this budget, and I'm going to speak to it for a few minutes. It causes me a little bit of concern. I normally see the first quarter as something to say, the projections are pretty broad, and they will get narrowed down as you get into the second quarter and the third quarter, et cetera. This one I'm concerned about a lot of what we're seeing within it, and one of the things that I'm looking at specifically is the reserves. I'm looking at slide 5 where you had the projected uncommitted reserves. I'm going to ignore the risk reserves because those are things where, if we get a pandemic, for example, that we would need to dip into those. And hopefully we won't get another pandemic, but I'm just not going to touch those. So then we are left with $12 million in reserves. And that is an opportunity reserve that we are only able, or we should only access for projects that exceed what the normal budget allotment is, et cetera. That is 1% of our budget. That's not a lot of wiggle room. I am extremely concerned about that number and about anything that we would commit to that would draw down on that. Do we know how much we have drawn down on that since the first quarter report? And if that's not available, then that's fine.
Tyler Higgins, Manager of Budgets and Reserves. I don't have a total updated figure yet, but it's probably drawn down maybe a few $100,000, so it hasn't moved significantly.
Okay. I didn't expect it to be a huge amount, but it's one of those numbers that I'm going to keep a strong, a close eye on. The next item on my list is collective agreements, and there was the information that we have a number of collective agreements currently being negotiated. Do we know what percentage of the workforce that impacts? Do we know how many, how many collective agreements do we have? Do you know how many people we would see impacted by the results of those collective agreements, and would they come to fruition? Presumably that will have an impact on the available funds through this fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Carol Blair-Smith. I don't actually have that figure with me, but it is a significant percentage of staff. There are large collective bargaining units involved, so that's certainly a number we can get for you, but it would be a significant impact.
Thank you, and that is also something that we have not budgeted for at this point, so that would be something that we may have to draw out of opportunity reserve or somewhere else. Okay, thank you. The carry forward projects, we have been concerned for a number of years about adding too much in TPW, doing too much paving, doing too much sidewalk work. And I'm wondering if we have any determination of what those carry forward projects might be, or what percentage of them might fall into the TPW bucket. Have we committed too much that the market just is not able to bear what we have asked them to do?
Mr. Chair, I'll have to follow up with the specifics for you. Within the detailed capital projection report, it will show by each project that's active right now the current status of that piece of work and how much they're projecting. If I look by the summary page, it actually looks as though buildings and vehicles, vessels, and equipments has the largest proportion of work projected to carry over into 23-24, with business parks and roads, active transportation and bridges second to those. So at this point, they do have the largest amount committed through purchase orders. It seems like they're getting their work based on the numbers here. It seems as though the road work is getting tendered and set up to progress.
Okay, thank you. One final question, just a reminder to the committee that the motion is not on the floor yet, so if someone could put that motion on the floor in just a minute. Payments in lieu of taxes is just about nil. Is that normal? And what might be causing it if it's not normal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that has been normal the past few years. If you recall, that number, we were carrying a balance in that, and it was mainly due to, I think we had a 20-year dispute over property taxes on the Citadel, which we settled and cleared up in 2016, as well as the Halifax Port Authority. We had some discrepancies there, which we have worked through when we have a statement of principles in place. So we don't have any issues with respect to disputes over taxes there. So things are well in hand in that area.
Thank you very much. Now, if I could have someone put the motion on the floor, please. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that the Audit and Finance Standing Committee forward the first quarter 2022-23 financial report to Regional Council for their information.
Second it.
Hansby, any questions on the motion? I don't see any. All in favor, please. Do we? I'm not. Is it ready? So one of the things that I had asked for was to see if this could come to the next Regional Council meeting for discussion immediately, as opposed to waiting for an extra 2 weeks. There is an amendment somewhere. Annie, do you have that available? I don't see it on your screen. There we are. And I'm wondering if there's any appetite within the committee to have this come directly to the next meeting with the amendment that Annie has just pasted on the screen. I'm also wondering about the process. Would we just amend that motion?
Yes, you could just amend the motion if you wish to do that.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
So is the suggestion that this would go to regional council as an information report that somebody could bring forward for discussion at council at the next meeting? Is that what you mean?
That's correct.
As an information item, okay.
Yes.
I have no problem with that, thank you.
Okay.
Do you want me to move that, or?
If you would move that as an amendment, yes, please.
Done.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do
What
we
did
have
I
a
say,
second?
Annie?
Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. All in favor of the amended, or the amendment? Aye. All opposed? Thank you. We have the amended motion on the floor. I don't see any further questions about that. All in favor of the amended motion, please signify.
Just one, do we need, and you're looking for it for the next meeting for 27th or for one following
The
from that?
27th would be what I would, the 27th would be what I was hoping for, yes. Thank you.
As an information item, okay. Yep. Then I think the way that the amendment is written now would still work for you to bring it to your next session as an information item, yeah.
So that would mean if it goes to regional council on the 27th, it would be going and gets brought forward, it would come forward, I think, on the 18th for discussion. Is that the intent? And I just bring that up because as I think our first touch point with council will be, I think, October 25th, where we'll bring in our budget schedule to be approved. And at that meeting on the 25th, we're going to do a bit of a budget update again on some of the pressures and on the process. So just wanted to bring, if it would be a week after the 18th, if that's the way the report is going to progress for discussion at regional council.
Then I'm a little confused. What I had hoped for was something so that this would hit the next regional council meeting for discussion, as opposed to hit it as an information item, and then we wait another 2 weeks to discuss it.
And I'm not sure that we could get that in for being the 27th next week, that it would be available for discussion as you're looking for. The best it might be as it'd be the information item, I think.
Okay, thank you.
And on it, sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
I understand you want to get this discussed, but what were you hoping to achieve for debate at council?
Simply a further heads up to all of council about the budget pressures that we are under at this point.
But this as an information item should do that, but if you want, we can also circulate this report to all members of council now as an information item to the general mailbox and just give them a heads up.
True enough.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, I don't see anybody else on the board, so all in favor of the amended motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. Great, thank you. That motion carries. The next, and thank you very much, Dave, and everybody else for that information. The next item on the agenda is 12.2.2, the budget increase to CP 210013. There is no presentation for that report, but we do have people available to answer questions. And so I'm wondering if somebody could put the motion on the floor, please. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I'll put it on. That Audit and Finance Standing Committee recommend the Regional Council, one, approve an unbudgeted withdrawal in the amount of $100,000 net HST included from Capital Fund Reserve Q526, two, increase 2022-23 capital project number CP 210013 Park Development new by $100,000 net HST included, and three, award tender number 22401 unnamed Park 27 Broad Street Tennis Courts Bedford and Cole Harbor Common Auburn Drive. Parking lot upgrades Cole Harbor to the highest scoring bidder meeting the specifications, Ocean Contractors, for a total tender price of $454,452.32 net HST included, with funding from project account number CP210013 Park Development, new, and project account number CP200001 Park Recap as outlined in the financial implication section of this report.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor. Do you have anything on that? Okay. Are there any other councillors who have anything on that? Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Othit.
I'll take yes for an answer, but I just, this is important for this young and growing community. I'm talking about the tennis court, but I still will do my regular rant on this, that when it comes to major projects like West Bedford and upcoming ones like Port Wallace, I still think that the CCCs and development fees and other sources could and should be used to purchase land and to build the kind of things that communities need, be it a bus stop, a tennis court, what have you. I still think that we're leaving money on the table compared to other cities and provinces when we're building projects of that scale, and which the developers pass on to their clients anyway. So anyway, my regular rant, but thank you for your support of this. It's certainly welcome and needed in the community, but I just wish we didn't have to pay so much of these sort of things, so many of these things. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Othit. I think it's interesting that another unnamed park has come forward. We have an unnamed park 29 in Lower Sackville. They're probably related. They're 2 degrees of separation. So I don't see any other speakers on the board. All in favor of this motion, please signify by saying aye. All opposed, say nay. Nay. Thank you very much, everybody. The next item on the agenda is 12.2.3, the Broad Street Roundabout, and additional funds for this. There is no presentation for the report, but we do have staff available to answer any questions. And I'm just wondering if someone would be able to put the motion on the floor. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
I can't. I don't have the report. Was it circulated today or something? Is there a copy? When was it circulated? Okay, I don't have it. I never received it. So is there somebody that would have a copy of that, or here? Is it on the table out there? All right. Thanks.
Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
It is moved that the Audit and Finance Committee recommend to Halifax Regional Council, 1, to approve the budget transfer of $2,205,000 from capital account CT190003, the Downtown Dartmouth Infrastructure Renewal, to capital account CTU01006, the Bedford West Road oversizing, and 2, increase the amount of the March 1st, 2022 award of alternative procurement 221024 for the design and construction of a roundabout at the intersection of Larry Utek Boulevard and Broad Street North to the West Bedford Holdings Limited from a maximum value of $3,250,000 to a maximum value of $5,943,572, net HST included, as outlined in the financial implications section of this report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. Do we have a seconder? Anybody? Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Well, here we go again. These roundabouts are getting expensive. I guess it's unique and stuff, but hopefully that our construction estimates are going to be rather close, more closely aligned. I hope it's not going to be turning out to another Washmill underpass situation, but it's just that such a variance there from $3 million to $5 million max value. I'm just kind of curious, when do you think we can anticipate a more tighter number?
Good morning, through the chair to the councillor. Yeah, we are working closely with our colleagues in TPW to, they're going to go through a review this fall, as they do every fall, of the tenders received and the values and what the trends they're seeing there, as well as working with our developer colleagues in discussing those things going forward. They did produce a more recent estimate than the original 3.8 that was produced in 2019. And this final value with the value engineering is closer to that value, but still a little bit over. So it is something that we need to work through going forward for sure. And this applies to all the work that we're doing, of course.
Are you the new David Hubley?
I am not. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Adam Lanigan. I'm a senior transportation engineer in transportation planning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hensby. Go ahead, Councillor Audit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for bringing this forward. Obviously, this is a situation that I think all of us around the table wish we weren't in the sense that we know we need this roundabout. It should have happened by now. Should have happened years ago. It would have been cheaper. And of course, this is something that is covered by the CCCs, and there were obviously some contributions from the developers towards this, which I strongly support. I hope we'll learn from this going forward to other large developments that this sort of infrastructure has got to get in there sooner. In this case, it would have been less disruptive to the community, and also I think probably a lot cheaper if we built it 5 years ago. I think that goes without saying. At the risk of, and I think it's appropriate to bring this up here, but I have a real concern, and I'm not criticizing in any way the folks who brought this forward, because they're trying to get this done, and they're trying to get it done as cost effectively as possible during a very challenging time. But I'm worried about the impact on this road during this construction. When the first roundabout was done, it had its challenges, but any proposal to close this road for several months, I have a real concern with. And I have a real concern because there really aren't viable options to reroute folks to. And I jokingly say we still haven't brought in BRT and rails and ferries and all this kind of thing that might help us. And also, this road even, and I think, Peter, you mentioned this on occasion to me, that even during the pandemic, this road and those roundabouts that lead to it were at capacity, even during the pandemic. So I need to understand sort of what, you're trying to find a way to get this done faster and thus cheaper. Absolutely commend that. I do not see this road being able to be closed for 3 months. I just don't.
Through the chair to the councillor. Thank you. We are working on a major arterial road here, so congestion is going to be unavoidable. We all understand that.
Yeah.
So there's two ways that we can approach minimizing the disruption for residents. That is with the duration of the disturbance, and the other aspect would be the reliability of those changes. So to speak to duration, if we can have a full closure of the road, that does allow us to construct more efficiently, so we can shorten that schedule, which is great. And as you do understand as well, we have a hard stop on this project as we're trying to get it open before the schools open. So that's a driver to this approach as well.
I do.
The other side of reliability, this is where we believe we can make some. This approach would result in greater reliability for residents in that it would be one closure throughout the whole project. There would be no surprises. So there would be no time of day changes where it's free flowing during the peak hours and then alternating flow during the off-peak hours, which, as we saw during the construction of the last roundabout last year, often the off-peak hours saw significant delays due to that alternating flow condition. We wouldn't run into the maintenance issues that we saw during that project as well, because we had some significant rain in the temporary gravel roadways, saw some significant potholes. So it's kind of a rip off the Band-Aid situation. Let's get everybody settled into a new normal that will last as short as possible. Allow them to adjust their timing, their routing via Highway 102, potentially Hammonds Plains Road, potentially as the alternates. And let's get it done as quickly as we can to let life then return back to normal.
And I get that in theory, but in reality, I just, it's one thing to say this is going to be close, get it done faster, and I agree with you on that. Get it done before the hard stop of needing it for the school. I agree with that. That's why we're hoping it was going to be done this year. But there's a ton of traffic, these thousands of cars, particularly during peak time. Off-peak, I can live with that. But during peak, I just don't know where they're going to go. I mean, the transit's not going to be in place. The 113's not going to be in place. Pushing it to the 102 via Hammonds Plains Road. I'll let my colleagues speak to this, but I honestly just don't know. It's sort of like shutting down the Bedford Highway and telling everybody, oh, well, just use the Dartmouth Road or use the congested 102 and you'll get used to it. And I just don't think that's going to work in this case. And I just don't. My colleague may, and I'm not trying to be negative, I'm just trying to be the guy that's represented this area for a while and drives in this area. And we've got a high school there and people, there are times now, I mean, my God, one day the province filled a pothole at the 102 and Hammonds Plains Road during prime time, and it backed up to the Chicken Burger. I mean, that is kilometers. And I just don't see this working. So we'll see what my colleague has to say, but I guess you don't need our approval to do this, but I can't say that you haven't.
Right.
Because I just don't think it's going to work.
One final comment perhaps to that. That's an example of one of those surprise.
Yeah.
Filling a pothole one day.
Yeah.
So that's hopefully what we can avoid by having a single approach to this is that that new normal does arise and people can travel earlier or later or carpool or those kinds of things which we can help promote in advance to help reduce those issues.
I'm sorry. I usually try and be very optimistic, but I'm very skeptical about this one.
Yeah.
No, it was several years ago now.
Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I thought David Hensby was before me, so thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to take a few minutes, and I sincerely appreciate being here to pass along my perspective on this project. Very grateful if we could move this along. I understand the overages, are not fully known at this time, but this has been a project that's been on the books for quite some time. The delay in the construction of the two schools, I think, gave us a little bit of breathing room before needing to get this up and running. HRC has not initiated the school boundary review yet. That being said, they know they have to get that through the door pretty soon. Now, to Councillor Hensby's point, I don't think this is about being negative or positive. I think this is about being practical. And while something might look lovely on paper, closing Larry UTEC for any period of time is very problematic. That's like suggesting we're going to close Hammonds Plains Road. The cross culvert project that was done on Hammonds Plains Road initially we thought would be much, much longer, but in actual fact, re-engineering of options were put on the table, and so that project did get done much faster, and the road was not closed. So I appeal to our TPW staff to go back and look at the paperwork and think about ways to mitigate the issues so that we can keep that road open, because the closure will cause significant safety concerns on the other corridors, Lucasville, Hammonds Plains Road, Bedford Highway, as well as residential streets where people are going to be speeding very quickly to bypass. And so I just think that we need to not look at things from a pigeonhole perspective and look at the whole community and think about where is that traffic going to go. Because we don't have anywhere to go. We are forced to use the Hammonds Plains Road, and that congestion this morning, just coming downtown, is all the way from the 102 interchange on Hammonds Plains Road all the way through and past Pockwalk Road. And that's on a good day. So to close that Larry UTEC corridor for any period of time will cause significant issues. We saw the delay with the first roundabout. We didn't need to close Larry Utech. We kept it open. And I know that that may have created issues for staff to get that job done quickly. But at the end of the day, we need to put safety first. And we need to think about the cause, the cause that of the significant safety concern with regards to pushing traffic onto a road that can barely handle the traffic that we have now. So thank you for your work on this. I appeal to the committee to pass this through. Let's get this roundabout done and move forward with having an ease of traffic on Larry Utech. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Go ahead, Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. I agree with my colleagues when I was looking at this yesterday and just looking at the Google Maps. Is it possible to work 24/7 on these projects to get them done in a much quicker way? Like, can we work through the night? Is it far enough away from residential areas to be able to do that?
That's something we have discussed. There would be significant cost increases to that as well. To get the contractor to work overtime and through the night is a significant cost increase as well, but it's something that we can go back and discuss again.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Purdy. Go ahead, Councillor Hensby.
Oh, just looking at Google's map, it would be nice to have a map with this report to try to figure out where this is going and understanding the implications of the patterns of traffic and stuff. I'm looking at it here and just trying to figure where it's going to go. I already see the 3 roundabouts now on the Larry Utech Boulevard to the 102 highway, but I'm just kind of curious, would this project qualify for any infrastructure funding from federal and provincial programs, because it is a major collector corridor and stuff? Just want to know, would this project qualify for that type of funding? And, I hate to say it, but short-term pain for long-term gain may be necessary. I'm trying to figure out the traffic patterns here and where we could divert them, because trying to provide an alternate travel route through a construction zone probably going to just add more cost to the project. I'm just worried about that. So if you can clarify those points.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can just speak to the funding aspect of it. This project, I think, to Councillor Outfit's previous point, is funded, I believe, 60% by CCCs on the first portion of it anyways. There are no current federal funding programs I'm aware of that this would qualify for, and even if there were, it would take some time to put it through. So,
Peter, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm sorry, my name is Peter Duncan. I'm the Director of Engineering and Building Standards.
Just curious now, I see on Google Maps they have a superimposed roundabout there now over a satellite picture. So I can see now some of the issues there, but the new Brookline Drive extension and everything else. But yeah, it's kind of a hard one to bypass, that's for sure.
To speak to the diversion route itself, the main route, if you were to approach on Larry Utech Drive outbound, would be via Broad Street South, the south end of Broad Street, to Gary Martin Drive up to Hammonds Plains Road, then back down Blue Water Road, and the opposite in the other direction.
Okay.
If there's nothing else, Councillor Hensby, thank you very much. And go ahead, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the report. Yes, it's wise to support this. We need it. My caution, not that you want to bring up the Waverly Road again, but my caution is around the communication patterns, and make sure before anybody posts go live on that website, make sure that the Q&A and all the information is up to date and accurate, and not live before it's communicated to the residents in the community that's supporting around it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Daigle-Gammon. Go ahead, Councillor Outfit.
Thank you, Chair. And just on a more positive note, we talked about night work, and I can tell you that the Bedford Highway project right now is going through highway's going through a significant project right now between Rocky Lake and 4th. And I didn't get any complaints. Well, I had one complaint until we started doing daytime work. The actual nighttime work didn't generate complaints. And some had to be done. I think staff was worried that there was some noisy work around the bridges and whatnot, and they decided to do some during the day. And now, I jokingly say it's backed up to Truro. But until such time as we did some daytime work, I didn't really have complaints. And the nighttime work actually went very well. And I'm sure, yes, there was a cost in, as part of that. But it is something that has been done at night, and it's worked well. So I just wanted to add that for your consideration. I've had a positive experience with night work on a very major road. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Outhet. I don't see anybody else on the board, so I do have a couple of questions. One of them is, I wasn't able to find anywhere in the report when the construction work would start, when any of that might happen, or the period of disruption. We've heard 3 months, but knowing when exactly that might be would help, and if you know that yet. Second question is, this suggestion talks about taking funds from the Downtown Dartmouth Infrastructure Renewal Capital Account. And I'm wondering what impact it would have on projects that would normally go to fund. What might not be able to be done if we take funding from that account. So, thank you.
To your first question, Mr. Chair, the project would be executed in basically 2 large phases. The first phase, if we can get through this committee and regional council, the project would start this fall, with all of that work being outside of the right-of-way. So anything that we can get done this fall to prepare for the major construction phase in the spring. So if whatever closure or staging plan we come up with would be a spring initiative.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll answer the question about the downtown Dartmouth infrastructure renewal, and that specifically refers to the extension of Dundas Street into the future growth node, the known as Dartmouth Cove. We have $9 million, I believe it is, booked in the capital budget for this year that we're not going to spend anywhere near that. So we would be essentially reallocating debt that was earmarked for the extension of Dundas Street. And I would intend to propose to council that we put that back in Dundas Street project for 23-24.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any further questions, and I don't see anybody else on the board, so all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. That motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody. The next items on the agenda are the Grants Committee. There is nothing from there. Members of Standing Committee, there is nothing from there. There are no motions. We have the in-camera minutes from June 22nd, 2022. Thank you, Councillor Hensby. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Purdy, thank you very much. Do we need to go in camera for those, or we don't seem to? So all in favor of the minutes from June 22nd, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you very much. There are no added items. Notices of motion. I don't see any notices of motion. Public participation is the next item on the agenda, and as of 4:30 on Tuesday, September 20th, there were no registered speakers for the meeting. If meeting attendees register for public participation via the sign-up sheet, the clerk would advise just before the meeting begins with the sign-up list there, and again, there was nobody registered to speak. So is there anybody in the gallery who would like to speak as a member of the public? Is there anybody in the gallery as a member who would like to speak as a member of the public? And third time, is there anybody who would like to speak in public participation? Not seeing anybody. Thank you very much, everybody. The date of the next meeting of the Audit and Finance Standing Committee is October 19th, 2022. And could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Thank you, Councillor Purdy. We stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.